the moment I discovered Real Vision, it was because I think I was just cruising around the internet and I saw a video and someone mentioned something about video. The way that Raul and a lot of the people on the platform were talking was really bringing gamification. And what was really interesting to me is like, why are investors talking about this? Like, this is something that we've been seeing for a very, very long time. You know, everything is better when it's a game. Loyalty points, air miles is money is the original game, honestly. Yeah. So that whole process of being able to sit there and actually create a core loop that makes someone interested in playing with aligned incentives that at every right moment gives you the hit of dopamine that makes you want to continue. It was clear to us that that was already happening. And it was something that we as children had already existed in, playing video games. Even if people used to do role-playing games with D&D where it was imagination-oriented, you could just see how much of the psychology and behavioral analytics that were occurring within this field, what value it would have everywhere else. But in 2000, the idea of gamification, the idea of video, it was like, what are you talking about? And certainly finance people were not like, let me go invest in games. I mean, it was like lighting money on fire and hoping you take the smoke and turn it into more money. Yeah. It's like, no one wanted to do that.
And what happened is basically our first business plan, I actually looked at it last week. The very first business plan written by a 21-year-old at the time. So you can imagine how those numbers made no sense. But what did make sense was an understanding that technology was basically automating routine production processes. And as I was looking at the technology and really just looking at, okay, well, we're in production. We're using tools that basically graphic artists, whether you're in video games or desktop publishing or film, will need to use. Jurassic Park had come out in the 90s and had revolutionized visual effects. And we started to just think look, right now we're rendering. At one time, we're going to do real-time processing.
Totally.
To do real-time processing, you need an engine that's capable of doing that. The engines that are capable of doing that are right now being used to play games. So they started to look at this and I'm like, wait, there's this engine that basically is becoming easier to use every damn month, every year. More artists are coming in line. And then my background in IT, I was like, wait a second. We're in demand because we have this, arcane understanding, this magic, that we know how to do stuff that no one knows how to do. This technology is going to become more pervasive and it's going to prove to everyone else how much computer processing power means to the world. But you need something to see that in. And we're visual creatures. We have to see it to believe it. And that's when I started to realize game engines would become that vehicle for artists, engineers, designers, producers, and then it would start to become something that everyone else would use. Now, that was 19 years ago. And I remember looking at it being like, well, it's just around the corner. Yeah. 19 years later, it's finally here. So, we had hair. I had hair. I mean, you had hair back when we did that. But, it was the ability to see an obvious thing. But it wasn't so obvious because you had to first get past one stigma that it's just a toy.
Well, it's still not obvious now to people. And there is still this feeling that this is just silly games for kids.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
No, that's just boomer talk, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
just
the
like
boomers
the 401k
still kind of control a lot of things.
No, they do. And they do. And I have a lot of respect for the boomer class, whoever you are. You know what I mean? But I think what it really just comes down to is all of the latest and greatest technology typically gets applied into video games. I think engineers are curious people, artists are curious people. They want to take the latest state of the art and apply it into these virtual worlds to be able to figure out what you can do with it. All of NVIDIA's graphics cards, there you go, 3D. I remember literally the first
3D
GeForce card.
Yeah, the GeForce.
3D FX card, when it went from 2D to a 3D world, it was mind-blowing to literally play an MMORPG for the first time in 1999, to actually exist in a space where you created your avatar, where you had characters and you could guild up and you had economies that were functioning and you were meeting people. It was all there. All of that behavior was already there. It just was the nerd class. It was all of us who were not the mainstream understanding this and playing in this world. So it just took 19 years to finally surface to the top, and certainly making the technology easier to use with fingers on phones, I think really changed it all.
And I want to basically push on something. If you go back to 1990 and you think about how computing was back then, very few PCs in people's homes, but there's a lot of mainframe computing. right? We're using mainframes to process things. Think about what right now AWS is. Think about basically cloud computing. These investments were made in the 90s that are now coming to fruition today. So the pattern repeats. And that's what gaming teaches you. Find the pattern. Get ready for the cycle. That's what finance teaches you as well.
Totally.
So these worlds come together in such an incredible way that you're just waiting for that moment. You just, unfortunately, when you're 20, you don't realize how far those damn moments are. They're like 20, it's a 20-year
years.
cycle, right? You know, you don't know what that is. But I think this is something that it's extremely important, especially for people that are watching, especially people who are like, I don't, video games, it is the toy. I don't get why this is happening. But you take a step back, you look at it. It's a way to connect with people, right? Our world goes so fast now that we need ways to process and to visualize that information. And we're pushing out so much metadata every moment.
Totally.
How do you visualize metadata without basically giving them things to look into? The metaverse is here. I mean, if you use GPS, welcome to the metaverse. Siri's telling you where to go. And there's a 3D map of your home, of your village, or of your city. You live it every day.
Yeah.
I remember in high school, actually, there was a computer class that taught, it had like a little, it didn't teach it, but it had like a book called the VRML, which was literally like a virtual world markup language to effectively create 3D environments over on the web. So this is like 1997, 1998. This stuff already existed. People were experimenting, trying to create these worlds that now people populate. I look at my son today, this morning, he gets up and he immediately jumps into Roblox or into Minecraft and is zooming around and existing inside of that. It's just so crazy to see that this is what he does now. That's where he exists with his friends. That's where he creates everything inside of it. But when we were high schoolers, this was all nerd shit. I'm sorry, excuse me, but it's like
It's real vision.
It's real vision. It's cool.
And that's the thing that's so funny is that technology jobs went from being like, kind of like, oh, I guess, to now everyone wants a technology job because that's where the alpha is. I think it's something that we recognize very clearly, especially as Latinos, that technology was the escape.
Yeah.
That was the thing that empowered us.
Yeah.
Knowing a computer allowed us to leave our circumstance and then go out and actually have new jobs, creating new economies that we would have never had access to if we wouldn't have had been introduced to this. And so there's a whole world full of people now who also deserve to have that opportunity. And I think that the technology is here where you're gonna have that next 2 billion creators coming from parts of the world that are so different than the way most Western Europeans or Americans look at things. And everyone's gonna benefit from it because it will be better because it's new ideas.